Johnny Carson was in the middle of his monologue when the red phone on his desk started ringing. That phone never rang during live broadcasts, never, but on March 8, 1977, it rang, and the voice on the other end belonged to the one person Johnny never expected to hear from again, his father. The Tonight Show was running perfectly that Tuesday evening. Johnny was delivering jokes about President Carter's energy policy, and the studio audience of 300 was laughing at all the right moments. 18 million viewers across America were settling into their couches, ready for another night of entertainment with their favorite late-night host. Everything was going exactly as planned. The timing was perfect, the energy was high, and Johnny Carson was doing what he did best, making people forget their problems for a little while. Then the phone rang. Johnny stopped mid-sentence. His smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Ed McMahon looked confused. The audience fell silent, thinking this might be part of some elaborate setup, but the people who knew Johnny well, his producers, his longtime crew members, they saw something in his face that they'd never seen before. Fear. The red phone had been a prop for years, part of the presidential hotline joke that Johnny occasionally used in his monologues. It wasn't even supposed to be connected to anything, but somehow, impossibly, it was ringing during a live broadcast being watched by millions of people. The shrill, insistent tone cut through Johnny's perfectly crafted comedy routine like a knife through silk. Fred de Cordova, the show's executive producer, was frantically gesturing from behind the cameras. He had no idea what was happening. This wasn't planned, wasn't scripted, and definitely wasn't supposed to happen during a live television show. But the phone kept ringing. And Johnny Carson, the man who could handle drunk guests, technical disasters, and every conceivable crisis with perfect professionalism, just stood there staring at it. "Well," Johnny finally said, his voice carrying that trademark Carson wit, even though his hands were trembling slightly. "I guess we should answer that, shouldn't we?" The audience laughed nervously, still not sure if this was real or an elaborate bit. Johnny reached for the phone, and in that moment, everything about his carefully constructed public persona was about to crack wide open. "Hello," Johnny said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "This is The Tonight Show." There was a pause. Static crackled through the speakers. And then a voice that Johnny hadn't heard in 12 years came through, audible to everyone in the studio and every viewer watching at home. "Johnny," the voice said, rough and aged, and filled with something that sounded like regret. "Johnny, it's your father. It's Christopher Carson. I'm calling from Norfolk and I need to talk to you, son." Johnny Carson's face went through a series of emotions in rapid succession. Shock, confusion, anger, pain, all of it flashing across his features in less than 3 seconds. The audience, realizing this was not a comedy bit, fell completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that studio. "Dad," Johnny's voice cracked on the word, and millions of Americans watching at home saw something they'd never seen before. Johnny Carson, completely and utterly vulnerable on live television. Christopher Carson was 73 years old. He'd been working as a power company manager in Norfolk, Nebraska for his entire adult life. He was a hard man, a practical man, the kind of man who believed emotions were weaknesses and affection was something you showed through providing, not through words. He'd raised Johnny with an iron fist and a cold shoulder, never quite understanding the sensitive boy who did magic tricks and made people laugh. Johnny had left Nebraska at 18 and never really looked back. Oh, he'd sent money home over the years, made sure his parents were taken care of financially, but phone calls, visits, real conversations, those had stopped 12 years ago after a fight that neither man would talk about, but everyone in the family remembered. It was Christmas 1965, and something had been said. Harsh words exchanged between father and son, and after that, silence. Now, Christopher Carson was on the phone during The Tonight Show, and Johnny was holding the receiver like it might explode in his hand. "Dad, how did you even get through to this line?" Johnny asked, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. "I called NBC and told them it was an emergency," Christopher replied, his Midwestern accent thick and unmistakable. "Told them I was your father and that I needed to reach you tonight. Some young lady in the switchboard felt sorry for me, I guess. She patched me through to whatever phone she could find. I didn't know it would be live on television until I heard the audience." Johnny looked at the audience, then at the cameras, clearly trying to figure out how to handle this unprecedented situation. He could hang up, he could cut to commercial, he could make a joke and deflect like he always did, but something in his father's voice, something broken and desperate, kept him on the line. "Why are you calling me Dad? Why now? Why like this?" The questions came out harder than Johnny intended, years of hurt compressed into 3 simple sentences. There was a long pause on the other end. The studio audience sat in complete silence. And across America, 18 million people were leaning closer to their televisions, witnessing something unprecedented, a private family drama unfolding on live national television. "Because I'm dying, Johnny," Christopher finally said, and the words hung in the air like a physical thing. "The doctors told me last week, pancreatic cancer. They're giving me maybe 3 months, probably less." Johnny's composure, that legendary Carson cool, shattered completely, his eyes filled with tears. His voice when he spoke was barely above a whisper. "Dad, why didn't you call sooner? Why like this?" "Because I'm a coward, son," Christopher said, and there was something in his voice that sounded like decades of regret being compressed into a single moment. "I've been a coward my whole life when it came to you. I never knew how to tell you that I was proud of you, never knew how to say that I loved you, and now I'm dying. And I realize that if I didn't call you tonight, if I didn't find the courage right now, I'd die without ever saying what needed to be said." The camera operators were crying. Ed McMahon had tears streaming down his face. Doc Severinsen, the band leader, was gripping his trumpet like an anchor. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was raw, unfiltered human emotion broadcast into millions of homes. Johnny stood up from his desk, still holding the phone. "What do you want to say, Dad? I'm listening. America's listening. What do you need to tell me?" Christopher Carson's voice came through the speakers, shaking now, every word heavy with the weight of 12 years of silence and a lifetime of things left unsaid. "I need to tell you that I was wrong, Johnny. Wrong about everything. When you were a kid and you wanted to do magic tricks instead of playing football, I told you it was foolish. When you said you wanted to be on television, I told you to get a real job. When you left Nebraska and never came back, I told myself you were ungrateful. But the truth is, son, I was scared." Johnny sat back down in his chair, the phone pressed to his ear. His face was wet with tears, but he didn't bother wiping them away. "Scared of what, Dad?" "Scared that you were braver than me," Christopher said. "You had dreams, Johnny, big dreams, and you weren't afraid to chase them, even when that meant leaving everything you knew behind. I worked at the power company for 45 years. Same desk, same job, same small town. I never had the courage to want more. And when I saw you wanting more, when I saw you actually going out and getting it, it reminded me of every dream I'd given up on, every risk I was too afraid to take." The audience sat transfixed. This wasn't just Johnny Carson's story anymore. This was every son who'd disappointed his father, every father who'd failed to show love, every family torn apart by words that couldn't be taken back. "So you pushed me away?" Johnny asked, his voice breaking. "You made me feel like nothing I did was ever good enough because you were jealous?" "Not jealous, son. Terrified. Terrified that if I told you how proud I was, you'd see how small I felt. Terrified that if I admitted you were extraordinary, I'd have to face how ordinary I'd let myself become." Christopher was crying now too, his voice thick with emotion. "And that fight we had at Christmas, when I said those terrible things about your career, about your choices, Johnny, I was really talking about myself. Every criticism I threw at you was really just me hating myself for not being brave enough to live the life you were living." Johnny Carson, the master of timing, the king of composure, sat at his desk completely broken. "Do you have any idea how much I needed to hear you say you were proud of me, just once? Do you know how many times I sat in this chair, interviewing presidents and movie stars, and all I could think about was whether you were watching, whether you thought I was doing okay?" "I watched every night, Johnny," Christopher said softly, "every single night for 12 years, even after we stopped talking. Your mother would go to bed, and I'd sit in my chair with the TV on low, and I'd watch my son make America laugh, and every night I'd cry. Because I was so damn proud of you, and I'd thrown away my right to tell you that." An audience member in the third row, a middle-aged man, stood up suddenly. "Mr. Carson," he called out, his voice shaking. "Mr. Carson, may I say something?" Johnny looked up. Surprised, security started moving toward the man, but Johnny held up his hand to stop them. "Go ahead," Johnny said. "My father and I haven't spoken in 8 years, the man said, tears streaming down his face. "We had a fight about my life choices, and neither of us has been willing to pick up the phone first. Listening to this, watching you two, I realize how stupid that is, how much time we're wasting." Another person stood up, a woman in her 50s. "My daughter moved to California 5 years ago. I told her she was making a mistake. We haven't talked since. I've been too proud to call her." Then another person stood, and another, and another. Within moments, a dozen people in the studio audience were on their feet, sharing their own stories of estrangement, of pride, of family members they'd lost touch with over arguments that suddenly seemed so meaningless. Johnny watched the audience standing, sharing their pain, and something profound happened in that moment. The Tonight Show stopped being a television program and became something else entirely, a collective moment of healing, a shared recognition of the walls we build between ourselves and the people we love. "Dad," Johnny said into the phone, his voice steady now despite the tears, "I forgive you. And I need you to forgive me too, because I was stubborn. I let pride keep me from picking up the phone for 12 years. I told myself you were the one who needed to apologize first, and I wasted 12 years we could have spent talking to each other. There's nothing to forgive, son, Christopher said. You were right to walk away. I was a terrible father. I was cold and critical, and you were human, Johnny interrupted. You were a man doing the best he could with what he knew. And I'm realizing now, sitting here in front of 18 million people, that maybe perfect fathers don't exist. Maybe we're all just doing our best, and sometimes our best isn't good enough. But that doesn't mean the love isn't real. Johnny signaled to Fred de Cordova. Fred, can we get a camera crew to Nebraska tonight? I want to fly out there after the show. I want to see my father. But Christopher's voice stopped him. Johnny, I'm not in Nebraska. I'm here. I'm in Burbank. I'm downstairs in your building. The studio erupted in gasps. Johnny stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled backward. You're here? You're in the building right now? I flew out this morning, Christopher said. The doctors said I shouldn't travel, but I told them to hell with what they say. I needed to see my son. I was going to wait until after the show, try to catch you in private, but then I got scared. Scared I'd lose my nerve. Scared you'd refuse to see me. So I called that phone and hoped you'd answer. Johnny was already moving toward the stage door. Which floor? Where are you? Third floor. Green room, they called it. Johnny ran. Actually ran off his own set while the cameras were still rolling, his microphone still live. The audience watched on the studio monitors as Johnny Carson, still in his suit and tie, sprinted through the NBC hallways. Camera operators grabbed handheld equipment and followed, capturing every moment. The footage that followed became the most watched moment in Tonight Show history. Johnny burst through the green room door, and there was Christopher Carson, a thin, frail man in a suit too big for his cancer-ravaged frame, standing with the help of a cane. Hi, Dad, Johnny said, and his voice was the voice of a little boy who just needed his father. Hi, son, Christopher replied, and opened his arms. They stood there in that green room, father and son, holding each other for the first time in 12 years, while America watched. No words were spoken for a long moment. They didn't need words. The embrace said everything that needed to be said. When they finally pulled apart, Johnny kept his hand on his father's shoulder, as if afraid he might disappear. You're really here, Johnny said, almost in disbelief. I'm really here, Christopher confirmed. And Johnny, I want you to know something. Every joke you told, every interview you conducted, every moment you were on that stage, I saw all of it, and I was proud, so damn proud. I know, Dad, Johnny said, tears streaming freely now. I know. The show that night ran 40 minutes over schedule. Johnny brought his father back onto the set, sat him down in the guest chair, and they talked, really talked. About Nebraska, about the past, about regrets and forgiveness and the time they had left. It wasn't polished or rehearsed. It was messy and emotional and real. Christopher Carson lived for 2 more months after that night. Johnny took time off from the show, something he rarely did, and spent those weeks in Nebraska with his father. They fished in the same creek where Johnny had learned to cast a line as a boy. They drove past the house where Johnny grew up. They talked about everything they'd never talked about before. When Christopher died on May 15, 1977, Johnny was holding his hand. The funeral was private. But Johnny read a eulogy that mentioned that phone call, that moment when his father found the courage to reach across 12 years of silence. My father taught me something important in his last months, Johnny said at the funeral. He taught me that it's never too late to say you're sorry, never too late to say I love you, never too late to forgive.